Hello, friends. Welcome to Torah Saturday. This week we are going to be exploring the Parsha Shmini and the death of Aaron's sons in particular, which is a disturbing, confusing story and event in the Torah. We'll begin with the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav la'asok b'divrei Torah. All
Amen.
right. So I'm going to, for those who are here in person, I will paste the source sheet in the that I created in the chat box, and I will pull that up myself, and we will take a look. And as always, feel free to, if you have your own sources, your own commentary books, by all means, I would love to hear from you. Okay, so may I have, can you see my screen? Great. So may I have a volunteer to read Leviticus 10, 1 and 2?
I can do that.
Okay.
Now, Aaron's son, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before God alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died before the divine.
Okay, thank you. Um, so, wow. Now, in the context, this is right after Aaron and his sons were consecrated as priests. There's a lot of sacrificing going on. All the people are gathered, kind of like a big victory lap. You know, they finished the Mishkan. They have started, doing sacrifices. They've consecrated the priests, and then all of a sudden, uh, they're dead. So before we start looking at some of the commentary, I would love to kind of hear what are your reactions to this? What do you think's going on here?
I always found this a really troubling portion, and I was um, glad that you're coming back to help talk through it. I've certainly heard a lot of discussions and interpretations, and I don't expect that anything will be satisfying.
Yeah.
My gut feeling going into this is that they were showboating. They went off script, and as a result, weren't they weren't permitted to do that, and they were reined back in the ultimate way. But I'm open to learning and hearing more possibilities.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. One, as Allison said, it's kind of troubling, and then Neil's kind of bringing up to, well, what did they think they were doing? What was going on here? What was their motivation? Were they showboating? Who knows what? And then, of course, there's the other piece, which was, well, did the punishment fit the crime? You know, could have burned their beards off or something, right? I mean, this is this was, as you say, the ultimate punishment. Other thoughts?
Well, well, um, we don't have much in the way of context, um, and there weren't any rules yet. So, and they did something that boys will be boys that um, seemed logical to them, and yet they had to then pay the price for what they did, even though there were no rules to follow. Um, so, you know, I I always have problems with this because yeah, there were no rules. They did what boys do,
Yeah.
and they got punished for it.
Hmm.
You know, Dad
You and I,
didn't tell them don't do that, but they
So there's one interpretation I'm hearing. Thank you, Diane. And again, it's kind of on the motivation side, it's like, well, they're boys are being boys, they do kind of dumb stuff sometimes. And
sometimes, a lot of the times.
yeah, pretty much any opportunity. The prefrontal cortex is not yet online.
but
The
how old were they? That's something Neil and I were discussing last night.
Yeah, Torah math is so confusing trying to figure out timelines and ages. And we were trying to figure out if they were teenagers or more middle age.
Yeah,
If
that's true. Their age probably could be anywhere from 9 years old to 70. It's just, it,
Moses died at 120, according to at least one
mm,
source,
40
and
years later. So that would mean he was potentially around 80 when the stuff was going on. But then that kind of flies in the face of all the portrayals of the time in Egypt and the escape that he was a younger man. So it's really hard to try to discern how old his
yeah,
kids are.
there's as you say, the Torah math is very hard to decipher.
Mhm.
Um,
It,
but I also want to uh, also focus on this word, that punishment that Diane brought out. Like, I think a lot of people sort of interpret this as like that they were punished, like this was a deliberate attempt. And that's something I want to come back to a little bit later, is like, could this, was this God in God's own way decided that this is kind of what should happen? And Anita, I saw your hand.
oh, I was just uh, from my Tanaka. There are at least five different interpretations,
Okay.
from a very charitable one to one not so charitable. One explanation is that they brought the instruments for making a fire into the tent, not realizing that on this special occasion God was going to send the fire miraculously from heaven, and when the two entities met, it was just an overwhelming explosion. Others argue that it was their impatience to succeed Moses and Aaron and take over from them, that they were moving too slow, and that was their motivation for going in and doing this. And then it said one intriguing interpretation sees them as motivated by excessive piety. Uh,
Hmm.
Out of their love for the divine, they tried to come too close to God, who is like a raging fire.
Hmm.
And then the last interpretation here, well, actually, there's two more. One says that there's a rabbinic legend that the fire consumed their souls but left their bodies intact. I'd never heard that, and I don't see where that's
Huh.
reflected anywhere. It's the reference is, and I don't know what this is. It's BT San, SANH. I don't know what that is.
So it's
Sanhedrin.
the Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin.
Okay.
So Sanhedrin's one of the tractates of the Babylonian Talmud.
Yes, they were removed from the site by dragging them by their garments, suggests that their fate was to suffer a spiritual death in their lifetime.
hmm. Yeah.
So there's a lot, it's like whatever people need to see in this. And I'm wondering if some of these more charitable interpretations are because some people are um, so upset by the idea that God would be so cruel so fast for what may or may not have been a stupid mistake, rather than, I don't, the last interpretation talks about the need for God to establish power. And this was another. So that's a lot of different interpretations.
Yeah.
They got out there.
There are, and there's even some other ones that I will get to, but I love that you kind of shared all of those. And let's kind of sit with that and comment on like what is it about all I like you started, you opened that door. Why so many different takes on this?
Because we're Jews, that's what we do.
Bingo, there we go.
It's something so hard to explain. The harder something, that for which there is the least amount of evidence, lays the foundation for more interpretation,
Hmm.
depending on people's circumstances and their own motivations and their own needs.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the vagueness of that lends itself to that.
Yeah,
And as
and it's
I
also
mean,
it's a death too.
yeah,
It's like the higher the stakes, the more people find the need to interpret this because it's a shocking thing that happened. This is like, as I say, that I see this is in the middle of the victory lap, right? And here we are. It's like, sometimes I'm reading a novel and it's sort of like, okay, this is getting kind of slow. And chapter 9 is pretty darn dry. I mean, it's a lot of entrails and slaughters. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, these people are dead here. You know,
Yeah.
I thought we were just going out and getting ice cream, and now somebody's dead. Um, and it seems harsh and meaningless. And some of the interpretations are very draconian, and some are very, and that's kind of what happens when sometimes when people die, especially an accidental death, a young death, like these were. I mean, these were the heirs to the high priesthood, and suddenly they're dead. Now, this is a good segue, I think. Um, I changed the translation here. Thus they died before the divines. It says Lifnei Adonai. Lifnei is before, Adonai is the divine, Yud He Vav He, the divine name. But originally it said in the JPS 2023, the kind of default that I have up, it said at the will of God. And so I'm going to pull up like the translations first, but well, actually, I'll pull that up now, but this is one of my pet peeves. So it's leaf nay. The lamed is a preposition. It kind of means before. And then panim is face. So it would be like before the face, um, as an adverb, before, behind, towards, in front of, from before. Again, it's sort of in front of, in the face of. So where did they get at the will of?
Because mine says died at the instance of.
I've
I don't
seen
even know what
that.
that means.
I've
It can't
seen that.
mean at the same time. It must mean something else.
Yeah, I was curious. I saw that in a lot of the translations as well. If we actually click the translations button here, here's the
Yeah.
JPS 2023 God's
Oh,
will, the
yeah.
instance of God, before the presence of the divine. They died before, they died in the presence, um, at the instance of. And if you click this, it doesn't particularly help, I don't think.
No.
So I don't know about that one. But the only one that, uh, so here's like, this one's interesting. This 63, the heavenly fire descended to burn the sacrifices and it consumed their souls, but their bodies were untouched. And they died in the divine house. So that's kind of that
Oh,
interpretation
that fits with
interpreted that you were talking about.
yeah, yeah.
And I think the reason where they get that from is Moses said, um, carry your kinsmen from to a place outside the camp, and they carried them by their tunics. So it's like if their clothes survived, then somehow maybe the bodies weren't actually consumed. It was just the spirit.
Yeah.
So
I'm
the
just going to stop the
fa-
share for a
fa-
minute.
face is used as a metaphor a lot. So I
Mhm.
think that's, you asked why there are all these interpretations and trying to figure out what face is a metaphor
Yeah.
for here.
Yeah, in some cases, it's the divine presence. I mean,
Mhm.
the a poem about the from the Air Force about I flew and I touched the face of God, things like that. It's
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
got close.
Yeah. I mean, I always get very I'm very suspicious of the JPS. So it's a great point that it's metaphorical, but somehow JPS has turned that metaphorical into the will of God. That is a very definite interpretation, kind of which I link to kind of the punishment. It's sort of like, um, it's not the accident, or it's not you plugged in the toaster, but that you were standing in a puddle of water and ended up electrocuted. It's sort of the accident versus, and we'll see, there's some interpretations that this was just an accident. And I think that was implicit in some of what Anita read. So I always, again, when I see something like that, which takes a stand, I always look deeper at the translation to say, is that justified? And in this case, I think it's a stretch. Like if you're providing a translation, you should do your interpretation outside of the translation because Lifnei, before God, whatever, you can definitely go to this was God's will, but that's not, you know what I'm saying here? It's a little, but
Although
every
it's not,
translation is an interpretation. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, the last one that you read was even more of an interpretation. The one that talked about their souls were consumed, but not their bodies.
yeah, yeah. That kind
And
of
good,
reminds me of like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where kind of the fire comes out of the ark and it burns the eyes out, but the bodies are sort of, that's kind of what's, yeah, and it is. That absolutely is an interpretation. And you can back it up because they were being carried by their clothes, but they could also have been singed kind of clothes too. It's sort of hard to say. Um, all right, well, let's go back to the source sheet. Um, so here's the Ibn Ezra. Here, we'll look at a
Oh,
couple of
excuse
these.
me.
Yes,
Can I ask one question? I
yes.
have, I have another interpretation that I just found that I want
Okay.
to ask you. They zero in on the word of foreign fire,
Uh-huh.
and that some sources interpret that as that it was akin to an act of foreign worship
Mm-hmm.
and not according to God's law, i.e., back to references of the golden calf. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why it was so severe. I didn't see that anywhere else either. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just
That is a big that is, I was looking for that interpretation as I was looking through the sources and I didn't see it. But idol worship, it's called Avodah Zarah. It's kind of strange worship. And here it's Aish Zarah. Um, they offered alien fire, Aish Zarah. So Aish is fire, Zarah is kind of alien, foreign. It's unclear. It's one of these, like, what exactly did they do? Did it mean, you're an electrician's apprentice and you didn't follow the safety procedures correctly and you ended up electrocuted? It's like, they messed up. Or was it they were trying to put on a fireworks display and got burned up and that's hard to know. But they did run from this. There's a whole another tractate of the Talmud called Avodah Zarah, which is all about idolatry and idol worship. Um, I personally, I just get mystified sometimes when the interpreters take the harshest view of humanity. It's like these people were killed, therefore they must have been worshiping foreign gods. It's like, and it all becomes about divine justice. And well, of course they were killed because they were horrible people doing the unthinkable. And this big celebration of and consecration, they decide to, through the back door, worship other gods. And that doesn't pass my sniff test. That just doesn't seem very plausible. But I think for some of the rabbis, like they couldn't conceive of anything but a just God. So therefore,
Yeah, yeah.
if you start there, well, it must be divine justice. We're going to back in an explanation for what the punishment was. And that's not wrong, but that's not my flavor. That's not how I interpret things.
So from what orientation do you start, Rabbi?
I start from Chesed. I think, well, I think there's two competing voices in the Torah. There's kind of this law and order voice, and then there's this Chesed voice. And so I think that I would probably put this story in, probably a law and order story. But even within that, I would try to, I tend to think this is more of an accident. Like people they were over exuberant. They, did something they weren't fully trained for, or they, there was an incident when I was in college where I was out with a bunch of my friends and we were all drunk and there was a construction site. One of my friends was like, let's go in and climb up on the girders. And I was like, no, I'm not that drunk. And I had to talk him out of it. He's like, oh, we'll just
Thank
be
God.
and we'll have a story to tell. I'm like, yeah, that's not a story I want any part of.
No.
And so we sort of talked him out of it. But, as Diane said, that's the kind of dumb stuff that the people do. And there actually is, like, if we look ahead, let's see, where is it? Oh, it's here. A few sentences later, we see, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages. So there's one interpretation that they were drunk, like they were at this celebration, and it's Rashi cites a midrash where there's a story about someone is standing outside of a store, and then he walks in the store, and then the king comes along and cuts his head off and appoints someone else to stand outside the store. And it's like, well, why did the king cut his head off? Well, it must be because the guy went in the store. We don't really know, but that's kind of the interpretation. So it's, well, because right after this story, they start talking about don't drink wine. Also, there's, I think, a valid interpretation that maybe they were drunk. Now, I don't necessarily, that's not what I would focus on, but I think it's a legit interpretation.
And interestingly, in this interpretation, it says this prohibition resulted not from Nadab and Abihu having been drunk, but from the danger that the bereaved relatives would drown their sorrows in intoxicants and not be fit to carry out their responsibilities.
Yeah.
So, and you're supposed to come, you come to God with joy from within, not joy from without.
So I had one other thought about the alien fire.
Yeah.
Not that they were worshiping other gods, but they were copying the worship that they had observed
Hmm.
as in Egypt when they were
Yep.
slaves. And so they brought in incense that was not um, part of the instructions, because there were very clear instructions of what they were supposed to do, but not what they weren't supposed to do. So Diane said they didn't have the instructions of what they should not do.
Yeah.
So we were saying, okay, this is a ritual to consecrate a place to God. And we've seen those rituals, as we were growing up in Egypt. And it'd be even better if we had this, whether it's fireworks or whether it's this kind of incense that they used, or just it said incense in the line.
Yeah, no, that's great, Allison. And I think that's
I think that makes
really
more
good.
sense.
Mhm.
It's that Y chromosome.
Kind
It's that Y
of laying
chromosome.
down that, as kind of God reminding everybody as we move through this giving of the law phase, I'm really serious.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't want to go into all the things that I did stupid as a adolescent without any Y chromosomes at all.
Well, there's a whole meme of "Hey, watch this."
Yeah.
Hold my beer to talk about intoxicants.
Yeah.
You do have a lot of, I have a lot of sympathy for everybody going through this period of
Mhm.
trying to figure out what is the law and how much wiggle room do we have. And
Mhm.
this would suggest there is none. And
Mhm.
that's not very forgiving, not very flexible, which would mean I think there would be a tension there to survive in the wilderness, to survive really tough times, being flexible, being able to bend and change would be a hallmark of human behavior. And this is kind of suggesting that within God's world, you don't have that wiggle room, period. Uh, that you've talked about speaking with two voices, and I don't think this is the same thing necessarily, but there had to be tension all the way along the way of how far do we really trust God to give these rules that we can't deviate from when our experience or our intuition is telling us maybe something else would work too, because they were living under such harsh conditions. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I think that's a really, oh, what do other people think about that before I give my take?
I just was hearing
Too
something
off
in
the
the
rails.
something in the news about how people who've been out of work for a long time and have gone out and done other jobs that are not related to their career, that talking about that in a job interview can be positive because it shows you are flexible and you can take on things. So being flexible can still be a positive, but not when you're following these very
Right.
specific instructions
Yeah.
from.
I think
Exactly.
I think one challenge related to what you brought up, Anita, is it's an asymmetric relationship. So this isn't like we're best buds with the divine.
That's right.
The divine has a certain set of rules, and we have a certain set of behaviors, and how to go about defining that interface is
Yeah.
fraught with all kinds of challenges.
This is not a democracy.
Yeah, and I would say what I would add is like in the camp, like sometimes you need to be able to innovate and try new things and figure out how to do things, but around other things, like the example that I thought of was fire. It's like you need to do A, B, and C to keep the fire burning. And if you don't, it could cost lives. People could freeze to death, people could get sick from not cooking the food. So, and sometimes there's only experience where like these things, you just have to always do it correctly. Like, the astronauts, when they're going up, they'll rehearse 100, 1,000 times the movements that they need to do, because if you don't do it right, it is a harsh and deadly environment. So it's, um, again, so
Nice,
it's,
nice analogy. I like that.
yeah,
The outer space is as alien to us as the desert was to the former Egyptian slaves.
indeed. Okay, let's go a little bit further. So, oh, I did want to say also to kind of this point about the incense. I don't think I took any of these commentaries, but there's a lot of them where people looked in depth at the language around how the incense was presented. And in some circumstances in the Bible, it's like you did A, B, and C, which meant that you sprinkled it on the top. And in other places, they used a different grammar, which meant that you presented the incense differently. So I think that those kind of interpretations sort of support what Allison was bringing forward, which was like it was pilot error. They just didn't, and maybe it was because, hey, you know, we tried it this way over here, we tried it that way in Egypt, and boy, this would really wow and dazzle, or this would really show our devotion to God. I mean, it's so hard to know what the motivations were, but whatever it was, they were coloring outside the lines in outer space, and it let the vacuum in. How's that for mixing our metaphors?
We're flexible.
And that's why we're going to survive these tough times. Okay, so here Ibn Ezra, um, so could someone please read his interpretations of these two verses?
I can go. So, starting with Ibn Ezra and Leviticus 10:1-3, which
Yes.
he had not commanded them. They acted on their own and were not commanded to burn incense, and certainly not to employ a strange fire. And then they died before the Lord. They thought that they were doing something favorable before him.
Okay, so from all these different interpretations we've talked about, where does Ibn Ezra come down?
They were coloring outside the lines.
And they didn't know any better.
Yeah, yeah, they were coloring outside the lines, but they thought they were doing a good thing. But he does highlight something which, these lines, they brought this strange fire, asher lo save otam, which they were not commanded to do. So clearly they did something that was not in the instruction manual. Okay. So now this Chabad, this rabbi, he's a 20th century rabbi. It said he was a spiritual Zionist. So that meant that he felt that being in the land was, kind of part of the divine plan. So could someone read? We're not going to read this whole thing, but we'll read about half of it. Come it down to here. Marty, we haven't heard from you. Can you see the screen well enough to read?
My pinching isn't working today, but I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
And strange fire went out from before God and consumed them. This is the same fire, and fire went out from before God and consumed on the altar from Yikra, the preceding verse, as it is said in Sifrei Zuta, and so explains the Rambam, that the fire didn't descend specifically to kill Nadab and Abihu. It was just that they weren't careful not to enter at that moment. And when the fire descended, it killed them, and it was like an accident. But regardless, they sinned, since they should have paid attention to this, since on that day they shouldn't have brought fire of their own accord, even though on other days this was one of their duties to bring it, as it is said above, and the sons of Aaron the priest put fire on the altar.
Thank you. Let's pause there. So Vayikra is the Hebrew name of Leviticus. So we're just talking about earlier chapters in this book. Okay, so what is the argument here? Maybe if we look at
They
this,
were doing something that they had been charged to do on other days and weren't paying attention to the fact that this was on this special occasion for the dedication. They were not supposed to do it.
yeah.
But also that God didn't intend to kill them. This wasn't a punishment.
Right.
It wasn't primarily a punishment.
Yeah.
This makes it sound like God made a mistake. God doesn't make mistakes.
Sure, God does. Why do you say God doesn't make mistakes?
Because God is God. Whatever God does, God intends to do. Since when do we let God off the hook?
Well,
We argue with God because God has, you know, um, the uh, and so forefathers argued with God, and Moses argued with God because God proposed things that were not good. So God, could propose things that were mistakes.
or certainly could propose things that were beyond our comprehension, beyond our belief, beyond our understanding, and the way we know the world.
Does the Torah say that God doesn't make mistakes? I guess, or does the Tanakh say that? And this is a question for a rabbi. Okay.
There you go, Rabbi. The question of the day, the big one.
Well, I'm going to answer a question with a question.
Of
Of
course you
course.
are.
And that lets you off the hook.
Of course you
So
are.
does everything that happens in the world, is that God's will?
So let's take a related example of you walk into a cave and you have an open flame and you don't realize that there's coal gas in that cave, otherwise known as methane, and you light yourself on fire and you die. Is that God's fault? Or did you just set yourself up in a circumstance that you couldn't have known any better?
Well, I think, and Diane, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you referring more to not what humans do, saying it's the will of God, but rather what God does, right? I
Right.
mean,
I
if
mean,
we have
people,
free will, there's
right.
going to be things we do that maybe God wouldn't want us to do. But I thought you were speaking about what God does would be a
Right.
problem. Those
Right.
are
Well, this
different
fire
things.
coming down. So sorry to interrupt, Anita. Is when the fire comes down and consumes them, was that God pushed the button and the fire came down? It's like, yep, you're coming in, pushing the button. Or was it God created coal and God created the coal to emit methane gas? And then God was no longer involved with the situation. And they walked in with the match, or, every day at 2 o'clock, Old Faithful spews water, and you walk there at 2 o'clock, bad things are going to happen to you. But if you go at 2:30, it'll be okay. And they showed up at 2 o'clock because they weren't paying attention. So I think that's,
Oh, go ahead.
and you can interpret this passage either way. that this was a specific punishment, that God pushed the button. It's like, I told you not to do that, boom, or set it all up, there's the spiritual technology that they were taught and it was misused and there was a terrible accident and they died.
And God didn't change what happened because there was some guilt there. So God didn't do it specifically to punish them, but God didn't stop it from happening because.
I guess for me though, I don't even assume that any of this really happened. There's a part of me that thinks these stories are here to teach us to think and to lead us into righteous ways. So maybe the bigger question is, what is it trying to tell us? And I think that's what I'm grappling with is maybe the tension between, did God punish? Is punishment how we learn, or is understanding what I've talked about before, unintended consequences of actions that lead us into problems? I think of this more as a challenge to us to try to figure out which interpretation makes the most sense to us and helps us to be better people. So I think the issue between Allison and Diane becomes one that I can't even cope with on this level. I'm just not there yet. Maybe in another year or two, I'll get up to your speed with you all.
Well, it's kind of yes, Anita. It's like it is. It is a lesson for how we should act, and part of that could be, what is this telling us about? You could go to the level of theology. What does this tell us about the divine, or what is this text trying to teach us about God's nature? And there's sort of some overlap, Well, it's trying to teach us you should do what you're told and you should do what God tells you to do. And that's very clear, to some people. And others it's telling you to pay attention and look both ways before you cross the street. Because if you step out in front of a car, you're going to get killed unless God intervenes and stops the car, which isn't the way the world works. So, yeah.
We've got a lot of modern metaphors that relate to this in my mind. You're playing with fire, you're going to get burned. When you don't quite know what you're doing, be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And there are situations where you have to be more careful than others.
Yes.
I mean, that was the commentary that we read in the Thursday Torah study, was talking about these. Aaron's sons were given very specific responsibilities as priests in training. And so they had to follow God's instructions a lot more carefully than ordinary people.
Or than even the high priest probably had more liberties they could take than the apprentices.
Yeah, and a prophet had different liberties.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of the idea. Oh, sorry.
You just the analogy of the astronauts, have to be a lot more careful than I do when I'm gallivanting around.
It reminds me of the when people say, ignorance of the law does not, prohibit your response, does not alleviate you from following the law.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse.
Yeah, and even the space analogy, there's a commander for that mission that owns the tough decisions, and everybody else is supposed to either ask permission or follow the orders. They're not supposed to make stuff up as they go along.
And hopefully stay in communication with ground control.
Absolutely. Yes.
My daughter-in-law works for NASA. I was so proud of Artemis.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I want to bring this is on the source sheet, but I want to kind of bring this to a little bit more general. what if this is telling us, what if this is a cautionary tale about spiritual technology, which could be like text interpretation. In this case, in the time of sacrifices, it was very, this was a very delicate thing. But is there a danger what are the dangers of spirituality or spiritual technology being misused?
Yeah, I just said God wasn't perfect. Fortunately, I'm not important enough to have
So
gotten
it's,
struck down
yeah,
for
I don't
saying
see any
that.
fire in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you weren't important enough to get a rainbow saying, yes, finally somebody gets it.
Or are God's mistakes intentional learning moments for us?
Yeah.
I've never heard the term spiritual technology before. I'm not sure I understand.
So it's sometimes used in the context of like meditation. Like meditation is a spiritual technology that can be used, or teshuva or yoga is a spiritual technology that can kind of help us.
So mechanisms used in
Yeah.
order to express. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So I guess part of what I'm thinking about here is like there were people, during the Civil War and in slavery in this country, a lot of people who were in favor of slavery would cite the Bible to justify slavery. Well, there were slaves in the Bible, or there were these two creations, and these were the subhuman mud people. And so I just kind of want to open up this idea about, you could think of this all as, as the Torah as just nursery rhymes and doesn't really, have any big power. Okay, maybe you get a little bit, or it could be something that's very powerful that can make the world better. But if it could make the world better, could it also make the world worse if it's misused?
There
Well,
was
we
a
know
film.
we know we have the world's oldest book club here, and I think this might be a prime example of why that is. That we don't have the ABC of why those two boys were killed, and so now we have to speak more about what we think it means in our relationship with God, uh, and that I think that's what's happened. We're not relying so much on all these thousands of learned commentators. We have to give more of what we think, and so why, if maybe by design or by accident, there was less context was given, and it encourages the thinking about how do we relate to God? What is God? We can never know that.
Hmm.
Uh,
And Rabbi Greg, I get your question because I look in modern dialogue, modern world politics, so to speak. And fairly recently, there was a senior official from the U.S. that declared that this war that we're in is in the name of God, and we know what God wants, so we're doing it. And that is, to me, a big red flag. That number one, somebody claims they speak for God, and number two, they can enact pain upon others and justify it through their allegiance with God.
Yeah, exactly. I would call that a misuse of, I would call that avodah zarah. I would call that idolatry. I would call that strange fire to claim that you can speak for God and, God can represent whatever I want it to. Um, and for goodness sake, if you're going to say that, at least give a biblical reference.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like before I was a rabbi, I never wrote anything without a reference. But now I've kind of been trained up a little bit more where I don't feel I need to give a specific reference for everything I say because I understand enough of how it goes together that sometimes I can't even tell exactly where it comes from. but I have enough experience where I feel comfortable in doing that. But I do take the responsibility really seriously because people listen to what I say. And so it's kind of the same thing. So some spot politicians spouting off, they're not a religious expert, A, and B, if they were, I still would call it idolatry.
I think of the vice president and the Pope having a bit of an argument about some interpretations.
Mhm. Right.
Tried to dig a little bit more into it and got so much into Catholic theology that I
Right.
can't even attempt to understand this conflict. But I would,
Right.
I
Yeah. The
would,
Pope is in charge of Catholicism, and Pope is God's representative on earth, and what they say goes, unless I disagree with them.
yeah,
And I don't necessarily disagree with that, ability to disagree, but even within a set religious doctrine, like they're the cardinals, the bishops, Catholics, they disagree all the time. So
yeah, I grew up in Boston, so a lot of Catholic theology got discussed.
mhm.
Uh, I had Father Drynan as a representative for a while until I said we shouldn't be doing politics.
Well, this seems like a good time, actually. I have a lot more on the source sheet, and we're not going to get to even half of it. But there's one was someone going to add something before I bring it up again? Okay. That's so Leviticus 10:3. So this is right after, they died. And then Moses pipes in, this is what God meant by saying, through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. And so we have Moses saying some stuff and Aaron being silent. I don't think this was a particularly helpful brotherly comment from Moses. But what do we make of Aaron's silence? Yeah, Anita.
Well, this commentary says that the Torah usually does not call attention to someone's not speaking. What then was the unusual significance of Aaron's silence? That he accepted God's decree without protest? That his anguish was too great for him to put into words? That he was tempted to burst out in anger at the unfairness of what happened to his family, but was able to restrain himself? Perhaps the text is suggesting that there are more possibilities and more power in silence than in speech. That's the part that caught my attention the most. Sometimes being quiet can impact others' speech and actions a lot more than words.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is one of the most powerful sentences in all of the Torah. And I kind of resonate a little bit towards the anguish interpretation. I mean, his two eldest sons were just killed in a horrible, they're your heirs. You've trained them. They're following in your footsteps. You've just been liberated from Egypt, and then all of a sudden they're dead and they're gone.
And Moses says something that's not particularly helpful either. So
Yeah.
there's Anita listed a bunch of things he could be anguished about. Another one is he's anguished about what his brother just said, and he's restraining himself from telling his brother that not helpful or you're an idiot.
I'll add even another one, that he was spared during the episode of the golden calf, and here his kids go away, and why it's even some guilt of how come I got away with it, and they made a pretty minor error and they're gone.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be, I hadn't thought about that. Well, that would be the worst for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's many people would agree that there's nothing worse than losing a child. Um, and yeah, and especially you put this overlay of, yeah, I did a far worse thing than they did, and I'm still here. So I want to bring you back. Like I talked about in one of my sermons, like some of the things, the laws of like how to deal with someone in mourning. And one of them I said from Pirkei Avot or Talmud, I can't remember where it was, but it was basically do not comfort someone while they're dead or still before them. You know, you don't offer words of comfort, at least until the burial. So here, maybe Moses is trying to offer some comfort if we, but that's kind of the comfort like, oh, they're in a better place. All things happen for a reason. You know, these are not helpful things to hear from people. So that might be where some of those rules derive from here. And then we also have the when you go into a Shiva house, you don't speak until the other person speaks. You know, you remain silent and let them initiate the conversation. Also, you'll notice like a little bit further, he's giving mourning, do not bury your heads and do not rend your clothes. So do not rip your clothes. This is like our Kriya ritual today, where we tear our clothes. You know, this is a very ancient mourning custom, you know, which is referred to in the Torah. So wow, what an absolutely fabulous conversation today. We really went deep and went there around this. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to say a thank you to people who've been watching the video. If you are still here, please give this a like or a share or a follow so that the social media algorithms will share this with other people. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.